The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. We go into personal interviews on this show and go over people's stories, growing up in cults, being terrorized by cults, escaping from cults, recovering from cults. That's the main line theme of this show. And this week we are going to be doing exactly that. I am welcoming Ewan Whyte. He is a man who lives in Canada, dual American-Canadian citizenship. He is a writer, poet, translator, and someone who grew up in the community of Jesus and ended up going into a abusive school situation of a religious nature. This was called Grenville Christian College. And we're going to go over his story. And unlike some of the stories that we tell, where, the escape is the happy ending, we have a little bit more at the end of this one. So I was very, very happy to learn about Ewan's writing and the story he is telling about this. There is a book coming out that we will discuss that describes some of this story. So Ewan, welcome to my show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And also thank you for telling your story, because not everybody steps up and does that. And it does make a difference for people. I've been doing this for many, many years. And as maybe you've been contacted by people too, it helps,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, well, as creatures, as humans, I think we're obsessed by storytelling ever since, as a small child, that you read children, you read your children stories, and they're always like, tell me another story, tell me another story. And I think it's a way we think about the world, the way we kind of unravel situations in our mind, and the way we cope with the world is a way through telling stories. Unfortunately, if the stories are true and very bad, it's maybe we're more into other people's stories than we would expect. Hence I got into literature. Although Bloom comments, if you have a lot of trauma, chances are individuals like that would not go into the arts in a major way, which is an interesting thing, an interesting aside. It may very well be true, but
yeah, kind of interesting. Well, of course also journaling, writing, art of any kind, creation, as I kind of bring it down to a core principle of creating things, is often a wonderful way of helping people or facilitating people's recovery and psychological growth following a traumatic episode.
Yes. I mean, I'm just thinking aesthetic art and art for our own health are quite different things.
Yes.
I think very different things. And,
yes.
One is very good for us, and the other one is something else.
Yes. I think, I guess the word is catharsis, healing, growth, reevaluation.
Catharing, cleansing.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, why don't we go ahead and tell the folks, who you are and what you're about. First off, I gave a little description there. How would you describe yourself and your situation in life these days?
Well, I mean, I want to drop a few one-liners there, but I wrote all funny, all silly ones, But so I wrote a piece. I've written on and off for the Globe and Mail for a long time, the arts section. Written some fairly high-profile pieces, but I did write an essay about growing up in this Christian Nationalist cult in Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Orleans, Massachusetts, and they got control of a boarding school. Grenville Christian College, just over the border in Brockville, Ontario. A lot of the staff were U.S. citizens, but I had the unfortunate of situation of having grown up in this because my parents got swept up in this cult. Both of them had a lot of emotional damage. The piece went viral, which is kind of it's fortunate and unfortunate. Just a bit of the spread. The cult that raised me, and I went from you know uh, doing literary writing and a lot of writing about contemporary art to writing a book on this. My other books are, this kind of thing. So it's not. I have a few more books, but so it's not really what I intended it to go into this area. Partly because it was never really believed, that it was a difficult situation. There was a constant denial. So this was a cult that ran. It was founded officially in 1970. It had roots earlier. It was founded by two sort of lay preachers, shall we loosely call them, Kay Anderson and Judy Sorensen, and they met in 1958. Sort of around the sort of charismatic revival stuff coming on, sort of at the beginning of that, a reaction to the coming flower power, and it sort of got stronger, and you get a lot of sort of right-wing characters. Of course, the roots of this go back to really the 1930s, and there's a variety of other things that we could go, and it could get all technical. But at any rate, so they were actually a lesbian couple. They hid from everyone that they were a lesbian couple, and they would preach terrible things about gays and lesbians. Even they would even say if a gay or a lesbian came on the grounds of the Community of Jesus property, they could feel it in the spirit, like the Spirit of God. So they started out imitating a variety of religious characters. Agnes Sanford, the famous you know memory healing lady. It's debunked, but and then so Judy was a follower of her. She brought Kay along, and they gradually became this preaching, healing duo. And they just sort of made stuff up as they went, and they were in some pretty wackadoodle stuff. They one point they hung out with I think it was a granddaughter of A.J. Gordon, who was into Anglo-Israelism, and they were believed that there were termites on the moon that ate moon dust, and they hung out with these women in the U.S. Midwest who uh, claimed to have had their resurrection bodies already. Just a bit of nutter stuff like this. But they to get authentic, some sort of level of I wouldn't say authentic, to get a level of acceptance, they would try to align to some extent or wear the clothing of mainline um, churches, but the more evangelical leanings ones, and they would get donations. And it turned out to be a pretty lucrative thing. Um, Together, as stated by the children, together they were a very powerful, dynamic duo. But separately, they were nothing special. It's interesting, and neither of them were particularly religious before they met each other. But anyway, I chronicled that in
No,
my
this is fascinating. I've
book.
never heard of an origin story of a lesbian couple starting a Christian nationalist group, hiding their true nature and railing against homosexuality. Clearly, we have seen closet homosexuals on the male side, or people who, pedophiles, this kind of thing. This is almost a stereotype when you see, these strident congressmen or government officials or pastors who are, just really laying down the fire and brimstone about how bad homosexuality is. That you kind of immediately, at least I immediately these days, think, interesting, right? This man is so hateful towards homosexuals or anybody on the LGBT spectrum, but it's not common to find women in that position. So I'm automatically fascinated by just that fact alone.
Yes, and they would enforce some patriarchal norms, but they would be at the head. So, um,
Hmm.
in their community, which really the community of Jesus operated like a micro-totalitarian society, where they were the
Interesting.
leaders. And it's I'm sure they're not the only group like this. Then they met a group of Germans called the Evangelical Sisterhood of Mary in Darmstadt, Germany. The leader of that, they may have been. Some of the people think they were actually a lesbian couple. Who knows? There are
Wow.
certainly are leaders that may have been the case. So Kay and Judy modeled themselves off of that cult. But they met in the winter of 1965. Then they agreed to go out and to Germany to visit the sisterhood to see how this monastic community uh, functioned. And they were special guests. Of course, they'd received the love bombing, and they decided to try to start their own group. But they were in contact with the Germans for a long time before they got their group set up. They even got the Germans over to Cape Cod, Orleans, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, to set up their group. I have all of the details on this. I chronicle that in one of the essays in my book and the history of it. And I even have the correspondence of the German leader writing from Cape Cod to Kay Anderson's son in Germany. It's both in German and English, but yeah. So they used a kind of brainwashing technique called, in German, is called the Lichtgemeinschaften, communities of light, and or they just translated but the Germans translated it as light session. And so that became the basis of control. It's a berating. They'd berate people. They'd sequester them away. They would kind of be interrogated. And of course, at Grenville Christian College, there was always the threat of violence. And these were very demeaning. The accounts to um, uh, Finnish sisters who got out of the Sisterhood of Mary. They wrote a book, Weinmaren Fallen, about their time in the sisterhood, and they chronicled the light sessions as they appeared in Germany. Anyway, and that was an academic writing. And so I compared that to the community of Jesus and Grenville Christian College, and it's just borrowed. It's exactly the same thing. It's really remarkable how they were able to import this. Now, the American version was a bit different, and at Grenville Christian College was different. Where in Germany they'd schedule the light sessions, and in in the U.S., they could happen at any time. At Grenville Christian College, they could happen at any time. And when you're very young, it's very distressing. Um, so I, when you grow up with this kind of thing, and that, you realize that you can't have friends because people are taught to turn you in for an imagined sin. And if you started being interrogated, you'd have to make up a sin, or they would make one up for you. You'd have to confess to this. Um,
Yes,
you know,
confession culture is one of Lifton's 8 points of thought reform in a group. Enforced confession, and of course, with that comes almost organically a whole spy reporting system where people are watching, spying, and reporting on one another to the leadership.
Absolutely. And the bonds of loyalty are directly to the leaders above everyone else.
Hmm.
And there could be no, nothing to the side, no friendships on the side, really. It's
Right.
limited. And the same with families. So in Germany, you weren't allowed to have children there. Or when the children visited, they had their own little thing, and they weren't part of this religious, I don't want to call it expedition, this religious experiment, this religious experience, shall we call it?
Oh, that's interesting. They separated the children out of it.
Well, if the children visited with parents, the children were not part of it in Germany, and no child was light sessioned in Germany. Um,
Ah.
but Kay and Judy did the unbelievable, and they started using light sessions on children.
Oh, sure.
And,
Oh, sure.
and this is something the Germans didn't do. In all the interviews, I couldn't come up with a single account of a child being light sessioned.
Okay.
In
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get to that, but I'd like to back up a little bit because this is just a fascinating origin story. And so the German group was, we wouldn't necessarily call them or describe them as Christian nationalists. That's kind of an American phenomenon. But this community of Jesus that you ended up growing up in, this was something your parents got involved with when you were young, or how
they
did this
did.
happen?
They did. Now, the Sisterhood of Mary, they were into they were very close to U.S. Pentecostal. They claimed to be influenced by Lutheranism, but they were into Anglo-Israelism too. So they'd be closer to that than they would be to anything European. Um, but
Okay.
but yeah, to my well at the time. But I mean, one of the major influences of the time was this American guy with his, Frank Bookman. I'm sure you know about that, and
Mm.
his, was it moral rearmament and the Oxford Group and a variety. They changed their name a whole bunch of times, and he, that's the claim is that's the origins of light sessions.
Okay.
Um, but
Okay.
there are variations of
Mhm.
this. Certainly for the
Right.
Sisterhood of Mary, I think this is it in particular, and I detail it in one of the essays. Yeah,
Right.
my mother was from a very traumatized background, you know, and you know, she was from the U.S. South, and she was carrying a lot of emotional damage. She was raped repeatedly as a young child. Her parents died when she was young, and she had a very difficult
Oh.
life. And I think that she kind of clung to this religious group as a kind of salvation, and they preyed on her. And she was so deeply damaged. She couldn't see straight. She had a lot of problems. My biological father, he had some problems. He had a mixed background coming in. He had some pretty, difficult things to deal with. He would be, one doctor thought he was a malignant narcissist. You know, whatever. You don't want to diagnose things. He certainly had some behavior that was a very, very bad behavior. But
Okay.
these were very damaged people, and they joined that group, and it didn't have a good ending for them.
Oh, that's a bummer. Now they joined before you were born or after?
Oh, they joined when I was very small. I remember my first. I think my first trip. I was 8 there. Um, and I was there 9 to 11. But I was there every summer, sometimes winter visits. Through my teenage years.
When you say there, are we referring to this Grenville
The
place or to the
the
church property?
community of Jesus, and then I also was at Grenville Christian College for 3 years, which was it was a boarding school, high school, but they would take people from grade 7 on, and I was there for 3 years. I mean, and other a bit of other time there as well.
Okay. Okay,
And
but
they
that okay. Well, let's walk through it chronologically because
so
I want to.
so
I
the
think people can get the story a little bit easier that way. I'm sorry, I cut you off there. What were you going to say?
no, it's fine. So the Community of Jesus that was incorporated in 1970, they got control of Grenville Christian College in 1973. And Grenville was run by a sort of wackadoodle group called the Bereans, um, run out of Texas. And, they were sort of inerrantist, literal, sort of standard Bible thumping types. There were some complaints about severe corporal punishment of children, unnecessary for children, about them. In one of the news reports was quite it came off as quite significant. So they were, and also I did research them as well, and um, there were some pretty horrific accounts on them alone, but they weren't abusive in the structured way Granville Christian College became after the Community of Jesus got control of it. So the two ladies went up, Anderson and Sorensen, and with their like Winnebago bus, like camper thing, and then they they convinced the staff because this was the last of the Berean sort of holdout schools of Berean International because it collapsed. So a lot of the people came from their various branches around the world, which probably a lot of them would have been pretty sad sack places, let's be honest. But like even the school Stony Brook in New York, run out of a basement by Al Haig, the future headmaster of Grenville. I mean, like these aren't exactly fine institutions. But anyway, they came back to Grenville around 72. Grenville was founded in, I guess, 69. Supposedly, they walked on the campus grounds and decided to buy the property the day of the moon landing. This is their mythology. Who knows if it's true? So Kay and Judy came up, they preached to them, they convinced them, and these are very, very vulnerable group because they wouldn't have much knowledge of the world in terms of humanities, of history, and they're, um, inerrantist type, um, evangelical type people who have a limited view of the world. So
Right.
they were easy prey, very easy picking. And they convinced them to come on board. Now, there was some resistance and pockets of resistance, but they managed to either kick those people out or wrestle the people into control, and they got control of the school. And suddenly, they were the story goes, the payments to the staff were very, very little. They paid off this large debt they had in court. The headmaster's son, Don Farnsworth, Charles Farnsworth, the last, the headmaster that was involved in significant child abuse, including child sexual abuse, as reported by the CBC on multiple accounts, and child all the way with children, terrible, on multiple accounts. I have, in my hours and hours of interviews, multiple accounts of this as well. And unfortunately, I did walk in on an incident. I'm an eyewitness to this as well. So there's no wiggle room with that. And so his son testified in court because it was a civil trial against Grenville Christian College, that they were giving about $100,000 a year to the Community of Jesus. Um, you know, you kind of would wonder because everything else was lied about. You kind of wonder. I mean, you assume the figure might have been a little bit higher than that, but I think so. It looks like it became a cash cow for the Community of Jesus. Certainly, there was money going in that direction, and the
Okay.
staff were paid as little as $30 a month. And I mean, it's
Yeah, I'm familiar with that drill. We were getting 50 a week max in the Sea Org, which and staff for Scientology was maybe $10, $15 a week, maybe.
wow.
So yeah, I've been there, done that. Let me make sure at this point that I'm following with what's happening here. So this other group owns this Grenville College campus, is working on it, has this sort of Christian culty thing going on there, and is abusing, and the headmaster's abusing children. That comes to light. He gets busted. His son testifies in court, civil court.
Well, he had died.
And,
He
and then he died.
he was dead by this point, but there was
Oh, okay.
a civil trial, like, after the school had closed, because
Okay.
while the school was running, they were very good at making powerful friends. So while the school was running, I don't think there would have been any chance of taking them down.
Okay.
A series of lieutenant governors of Ontario, were um, on the school's board, like Lincoln Alexander. I mean, it's crazy. Trevor Eaton, this, senator, or brought the students to some sports game in Toronto. Like, it's really, uh, I think a lot of these control groups, they nestle into power. I think they offer favors to people in power to get them on side. And then those people have a vested interest in keeping things as they are.
Very much so. So much so that comparatively, and I'll just throw these out while we're going through this, because the models are almost always the same, even if the language of it is different from one group to another. In Scientology, they call it PR area control, public relations area control. Get in good with the local officials, with the police, with the civil authorities, and get them thinking you guys are awesome, that we, the group, are awesome. And that way they head off any legal trouble or civil trouble, and they get left alone to do whatever they want inside their enclosed church spaces. That's kind of what it sounds like you're describing.
Oh yes, this is what happened both in Cape Cod. Well, I mean, this is what I would say appears to have happened in Cape Cod. It certainly happened in Ontario,
Okay.
where the police said, one of the statements was something like, "It's not in the public interest to lay charges." There were some charges laid. Somebody was found innocent of child sexual assault, but there were arguments on whether he was even charged with the right offense. I mean, and there were complaints that the best witnesses weren't called. It looks like the case was deliberately thrown.
Right.
I can say from my own personal experience on Cape Cod that you know I think the police felt hamstrung. I don't know what exactly the story is, but it appeared very clear that things weren't as they appeared. There was clearly
No.
something more complicated going on.
Right. Well, we have I can't speak to Ontario. I'm not Canadian and I don't know Canadian law the same way I understand American law. But when it comes to our Constitution in the US, the freedom, the First Amendment, freedom of religion, has an awful lot and has a tradition of having an awful lot of legal and police authorities backed off from doing anything about a church or a group, even if there are testimonials or even evidence of abusive behavior within the confines of the compounds or churches. The law won't step forward or won't really investigate or is not keen to, because it gets into a whole legal entanglement of well, we're practicing our religion and you don't get to come in here and tell us how to practice our religion, even while they're committing crimes in the name of practicing their religion. So I've seen far too many instances of that. I get very cynical about it, because of the number of times that cult leaders have taken advantage of the First Amendment to be able to do what they want with their followers and the children of their followers with impunity.
Oh yes, so I include a write up on that. I'm just looking for it here. If I could read you a little bit, it's
Please.
so it's it's a paraphrase from one professor about Professor Wendy Brown. I think she said it's out west in California. And religious freedom entails a sort of contradiction because no religion in the world has ever endorsed the kind of liberal individual rights and freedoms that are central to American democracy. Certainly not the Puritan founders. What religious freedom protects is the right to choose our faith and mode of worship without interference or preferential treatment by the state. That's the basic principle of separation of church and state. And it is fundamental to democracy. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion in the US, but certainly not freedom in religion. However, how this is interpreted is going to be, it's going to have a sliding scale, shall we say.
No, that's a brilliant observation on her part because it reveals the basic hypocrisy at the core of really the founding of America. America was initially this sort of religious retreat for these groups, these sort of extreme groups or groups that were not getting along with the Church of England or French or Belgian or wherever they were coming from. They came over here seeking the ability to do what they wanted and practice their religion the way they wanted. Yet, if you dig into the details of what they actually practiced, it was abusive as hell. I mean, by modern standards, almost across the boards, when you go through the Puritans and the Quakers and the Shakers and the thises and the that's, you have these very tight knit us versus them religious communities that really check off almost every point of a destructive cult.
Oh yeah, they're pretty fascistic, and I remember, so they were kicked out of England. As I remember, they were kicked out of England. They ended up in Holland. Holland was, the open-minded thing. There's funny quotations about the tolerant, dull Netherlanders, as Erasmus used to describe them, convivial, but drinking too much. But so they ended up booted out of Holland, and they end up in the U.S. But they were really religious fascists. Even the first execution, as I remember it, of a young person, probably a handicapped person mentally, over some sort of bestiality situation, whether the guy did it or not, or whatever. It looked like a forced confession. And you look at the madness of these people, and then you look at how they treated the native population, their attitudes. I mean, these were not nice people.
No.
They were good at making babies, and then the successive wave of wars in Europe, and its influence just of that religiosity, that particular fascistic brand of religiosity, just grew and grew. And so, it was hard to offset it, as I understand it, with immigration at the time. And so the U.S. has this undercurrent of Puritanism right back, it looks like, to them. So, and this is unfortunate. And it's funny, Northrop Frye, the literary critic, talked, untapped possibility of mysticism or this. Well, untapped possibility for religious puritanical fascism in this particular situation.
Yeah, no, it's a key part of our founding of this nation, and it's one of the reasons why so many people in this country are so absolutely convinced that America must be and always was a Christian nation. But then when you dig into the details of, okay, well, which denomination, because there's only about 500,000 of them, and it's like, oh no, it's ours. Of course, it's our denomination that it was founded on, right? And you get the whole culty, us versus them, back and forth. And I think that has been because there has been such a multiplicity of views and religious ideas and our melting pot legacy, which is also part of our founding. That's the thing that sort of prevented any one group from rising up and sort of taking over the whole thing. Whereas, over in England, you have this one church, the government-sponsored Church of England, right? And we don't have that here. And we looked at that and went, yeah, we don't want that. And so it's sort of like, because of the dueling feuds of the us versus thems of the various groups, it was able to kind of be kept in check a little bit. And then we have founding fathers who realize, well, religious belief's important, and we don't want a government or a king or a dictator telling you what to believe. So we're going to put things in place so that all these people have the right to believe whatever the hell they want. And yet doing that, as that quote pointed out, right, is doing that is a freedom that none of those groups would give each other, which is a fascinating point of kind of hypocrisy that is resident in the very bedrock of our culture and has led, I believe, to so many of our modern troubles.
If I could read just a little paragraph here out of one of the essays. I'm enough of a libertarian in the non-US sense of the word to think that consenting adults in their right minds can join whatever faith or cult they like and even drink the Kool-Aid there. Children, on the other hand, cannot freely choose. We don't grant minors the capacity of consent in cases of sexual violation. So why should society allow them to be subjected to religious indoctrination when it also involves sexual, physical, and psychological violence?
Bingo. Right. That has been my position from day one, is when you're doing it to the kids, they have no critical thinking skills or ability yet. That's not developed. That's a developing skill. And your brain's not even fully formed until you're around 25 years old. So there's all these things stacked against kids. And when you present them with the overwhelming dogma and mechanisms of cultic influence and control, they don't stand a chance. You grew up in something like that. I grew up in something like that. We know what we're talking about when we say this is abusive behavior towards children. But it's so contentious because so many parents are so convinced that their one brand of religion is the right one and their kids have to have it, and it's my duty to make them get it. And so you get this very human problem of independent thinking and critical thinking and emotional intelligence and the right to have those things versus, no, my dogma is the only dogma and the only truth with a capital T. And I am failing as a parent, is how they often feel, if I don't get this into the brain of this kid before they're able to think about it. And this is such a huge problem around the world, really. It's not a uniquely American problem at all. It's a problem of the ages, but it's one that we can now talk about and analyze and see from our current perspective of freedom, liberty, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, like we've had things happen that have made us rethink some of these historical legacy ideas, of how kids are supposed to be brought up. But we're fighting an uphill battle. It's almost a Sisyphus type battle because the power of religious belief and dogma can be so overwhelming to a human mind.
Oh, yes. It makes you think of Kenneth Clark commenting about the Renaissance and, the Counter-Reformation. I think it was Council of Trent, so 1537, and the backward thinking, they produce no philosophers. Like they've got Vico maybe. It's fascinating that religion really will stamp down thought, and it's the Protestant countries that produced, I mean, French to a certain extent, but it's a outlier there. But what Descartes, he went off to Sweden, and Queen, whatever, she made him, with Christina, whatever, she made him get up early, and he died apparently, or cold or something silly like this. But yeah, it's against thinking, all that kind of thing. You switch the brain off.
It's a very patterned, dogmatic way of thinking, to put it that way. That's how I think about it, because I think that people think, but they think in such it falls under how Dr. Janja Lalich describes a cult model, right? There's a lot of different ways of describing cults or cultic activity, but this is one I go to often, which is it's called the bounded choice model, right? Where basically the choices available to you are bound. It's this and it's this, or it's actually just this. Your choices are more and more limited the more and more deeper you go into the belief set. And that's the exact opposite of freedom of thought or independent thought. But so then what happens is all the thinking goes into, because we don't stop thinking, our brains don't stop operating, but instead all of it goes into justifying or rationalizing why this one path is the only path. And I did this as a Scientologist, of course. And I thought quite a bit about why Scientology was the only one true path and nothing else could be true and nothing else was true. And, of course, Aquinas did that with his version of Christianity too. I mean, just gadzooggles of books and thinking and whatnot, all in the direction of really telling people to stop thinking. So it's a conundrum. It's a little bit of another one of those double binds of we are thinking creatures, and yet we're in a group or a dogmatic belief set that tells us thinking is dangerous. Critical thinking is a tool of the devil. It's not yours to question, right? It was not ours to reason why. It was simply ours to do or die. I mean, it's this kind of regimented militaristic thinking, I suppose you could say.
And you were in Scientology from a very young age.
4 years old. My parents got involved.
And it just, sorry.
No.
It's just that sad that and you think of the trauma and of children so young, and how they talk about how the brain forms, and of course that famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, by the Harvard medical guy, yeah, it's just very sad for the children.
It's the worst. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. And it unfortunately is contagious, and it's rife throughout the United States. And this leads to, spare the rod, spoil the child thinking, and biblical memorization. And when you get into the hardcore evangelical groups of all kinds of denominations, but when you get into these sort of literalist interpretations and ideas, then it really becomes dangerous, because that mode of thinking is very absolutist. It is our way or the highway, and if you go on the highway, we're going to plow right over you. Is sort of the thinking, right? We don't want you around. We don't want it. It becomes an existential issue. We can be the only ones who exist because we're the chosen ones under God's greater glory, or however they're going to talk about it. And so, I guess that's certainly social commentary and criticism that is a conversation we need to have over and over again these days, because we're now being ruled by religious extremists in here in America, and it's not Trump that's the problem, it's them. Trump is just a flash in the pan compared to these people. Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, I'm referring to those folks. But getting back to you and your story.
Well, I just was going to add Christian Reconstructionism. This is pretty wackadoodle stuff. It's, even Rome banned, the paterfamilias. I mean, like, with the absolute power of the patriarch of the family, of life and death. And I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
What some of those nutters want to bring in, and it sounds like a joke at first, and sometimes these things go a lot further than we expect.
Yeah, they routinely have a dark ending, because it comes from a dark place. It's exclusionary. It is uncompassionate. It is intolerant. And it is a very, very fixed way of thinking. And human beings naturally, organically, are the exact opposite of that. We impose and cling to these very, very rigid belief systems, but we do so in an unnatural way. You have to be forced and trained and beaten into a compliance culture. It's another way of describing a cult, right? It's a conformity culture. And you really physically have to be traumatized into it in order to adopt those kind of hardcore ideas, or you have to be born broken in the first place, which is, you know, your predatory type personality. So it's not good for us. It never has been good for us. It's been the cause of untold misery across the ages, and this is not a blanket condemnation of religious belief. I think we're being clear today that we're talking about extreme beliefs and extreme action informed by those extreme beliefs, not just a belief in God. If you want to believe in God, go right ahead, but it's what you do with that belief when it becomes horrible. And unfortunately, a lot of people over time have done a lot of horrible things in the name of the greater glory of God, you know?
Yeah, and I think of Nietzsche and the idea the sacred is the most important fundamental human phenomenon. And I think I mean, religion and history really is in combination constitute a basis of culture. I mean, it's going to well, the roots are going to be going out all over the place from that, but certainly the idea of the sacred is a fundamental part of us. And then a secularized form is where we get art. But yeah, so I mean, we can't really get rid of that. The famous book, The Sacred and the Profane, the most profane person by Eliade, taught at the University of Chicago for a while, and questionable on some of his other stuff. Famous book on shamanism, but about how somebody can think of themselves as completely irreligious, and they'll do things that would fall into ritualistic patterns, and this would be under aspects, religious category aspects, and we as humans we do relate to the world in this way. So it's not negating this. It's just this particular brand, this particular style of relating to the world, which I think is partly out of fear. It's partly out of an education situation, and it's
Yes.
also abusive control and abuse by the people in power. The people in power know this isn't, you know, they know what they're doing usually.
Yeah, well, sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. It's a fascinating study, um, and it's been a difficult one over the years to get my head around that, because it's easy to believe that those in power, routinely understand that it's all a scam or a con or something, and that's not always the case. L. Ron Hubbard was a very interesting research project in that sense, right? He had beliefs, he had ideas, he had things that he held dear to himself, but it wasn't what he was telling his followers about. It was a different belief system that actually undercut the Scientology belief system, and it had its roots in Gnosticism and spiritualism and Aleister Crowley's Thelema. So there were beliefs, but at the same time, he's conning people, and he knows it because he's trying to make people his slaves. He literally wrote it down. So it's wild stuff. People are complicated, and they defy stereotypes and expectations often. It's very, very interesting going into the weeds on this stuff. But we can definitely paint with broad brushes when we talk about the destructive influence of this stuff on societies, and certainly on our current society. This is not good stuff for us right now, right? This whole white lash, religious backlash that's happening right now here in America is destroying our country, quite literally destroying the very foundations of it. And and again, is so hypocritical, because the very freedoms that this country enables are the only reason these people are able to do this. So it's a gross commentary on our short-sightedness in the end. And I think you're absolutely right that it is fear-based, it is education-based, lack of education-based, because people freak out about the afterlife and about the morality, and are they living a good life? And you have people who fall into the most atrocious behavior with the idea that this is morality, this is how I'm supposed to be, because this is what is good. It's mind numbing in its implications.
That, but
Yeah, wild stuff, huh?
it's I mean, it's just going to hopefully it's something that can be somewhat managed, or
We were doing a good
the
job with our
extreme.
Constitution for a good long time, the cycle of history sort of is explained by this, right? Enough people over enough time throwing enough acid into the sort of the cog wheels of the system, and suddenly the system stops working the way it's supposed to, and that is why we get the democratic decline that we have happening now. That's my generalized take on it. And obviously, religious influence is a big part of that. Now, I want to get back to your story because there is a story to tell here. And beyond like I said, the bigger picture of this. So you grew up in what we might call a fundamentalist evangelical belief system?
Well, that's what the community of Jesus, there are claims that it's somehow Benedictine inspired, but it's really its main influence is evangelical Pentecostalism, but at a kind of an extreme version of it.
And what does that mean? What did it look like? What were you growing up believing or being told to believe?
Well, all this you'd have to make up sins that you were doing. I mean, how much sinning can a little kid in a cult do?
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't laugh. In the spirit of Byron, if I laugh at any mortal thing, I laugh that I may not weep. I mean, it's not a sincere laughter. It's
we understand.
uh, it's really. It was the belief system was crazy, absolutely crazy, and you'd shut down. I ended up shutting down like the children around me. You'd emotionally kind of shut down. And you sort of lose control, and lose a link with sort of any sort of a gut feeling or your inner self. Your ability to recognize or deal with dangerous things or boundaries are completely shattered. Um, and it's under even as a young child, the labor situation you're working for, you'd get up in the morning, you'd go do this very quite early, you'd go for this little short church service, and then you'd be, if you weren't in school, you'd be working till noon, you'd have a little lunch, then you'd be working the afternoon, and then often you'd work a little bit, you'd work till dinner. Occasionally, sometimes you'd be working in the evenings too. So you didn't have time to think. You didn't have time to develop. You didn't have time to play. In imitation, famously, Aristotle and everyone else, imitation is how we learn. And imitation and play is a kind of, and you think of Jung and his wonderful comments about that. And so you didn't have a chance to do that. And so many things, were shut down.
When
And
you say working, what you were
you'd be be
labor?
working
What were you?
in the gardens. You'd be working in the like vegetable gardens. You'd be, you know, spraying
Wow.
chemicals on trees. There's always be some sort of work thing. Meanwhile, you're such a little kid,
Right.
and that's just what life was. And it was this droning on and on sense of you aren't completing anything.
Right.
It just would wear you right down. You'd see people falling over and just joining in, and and people would become kind of emotionally hollowed out from these light sessions as well.
Now, when does these light sessions come into your life?
Um, right away when I was 8.
8 years old.
Yeah.
And what did this look like? Describe what a typical session would look like for you as a 8-year-old, and then moving forward.
Yeah, I'm not fabulous in extempore speech. I've either written down and thoroughly thought out here beside me. But you'd be encircled by adults. You're a child, and you'd be accused of a sin, and there'd be threat of violence, often carried out, and you would have to confess to a sin, and they'd scream. There was a thing in blasting; they put their face right up to yours and scream as loud as they could, and you had to show
Oh
that you
my
were
God.
terrified. And it would just go on and on. But you would have this multiple times a day, and you would just where you just become worn down. Grenville Christian College, um, it was they had light sessions too. They would use them on the paying students, not just in their own little group. And you even some of the writing you can see it's totally implied that that's how they brought that to the students. But at
Wow.
any rate, it's yeah, you lose a sense of your inner self.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Oh
which is
yeah.
why I'm much better written down than this, extempore speech bit. But yeah.
Well, I think I get the idea. When you say you're surrounded by these adults, so were you in a cloistered community situation then when
Well,
you
you were
were with
completely
this?
sealed off. So it was a completely sealed off world. You couldn't leave. Um,
Okay.
that's it. And you were separated from your parents, living at a separate house. Um,
Oh, wow.
you're
Okay.
completely separated from your parents. Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. And
I've done
this
a
was your
very poor job of this. In any interview that I do after this, I'm gonna send out a thing of how I'm gonna each subject matter. Maybe I should be like Northrop Frye, be really methodical about everything. But yeah, I haven't done well, so I
No,
apologize. I
you're
should have done
fine.
better in explaining um, from the get-go chronologically. But yeah, no, you sequestered away. You weren't. I wasn't allowed to speak to my parents. Of course not. Of course not.
Wow.
That was the policy. And
Wow. And this was even before you went to the college.
yes. And
Okay.
then
So
at the
this
college, it was the same policy, of course.
right. Right,
Yeah,
right.
my
Okay.
mother taught there, and
So
yeah.
these two women put together this community. About how many folks were there?
Well, they claimed it seemed 250. They claimed more. It's unclear how many were oblate members, people who were members but not living there. You know, the numbers claimed maybe they're not necessarily the numbers. So, but
Okay.
it would be a pretty small covenant community of the three
Right. Right.
surviving. It's the of the three surviving covenant communities left.
Right.
I think the other is what the word from 67, and the other one is the people of praise, interestingly enough. We
Mm,
studied them as well, but
mm.
I think
This
they're
has shades of
72.
12 tribes to me as well, the way the children are treated and the way it's a work compound. Everybody lives here, everybody's equal kind of situation.
Well, yeah, you're not really equal. I mean, it's very
Oh, was
hierarchical.
there a hierarchy?
Yeah. Yeah, and that
How did hierarchy work?
leadership, uh, you know, and some of the leadership's children could live with them, but if you were poor, that meant you're low ranking. Somehow it was very, very money oriented, where if you somehow didn't have money, you had less humanity. I'm sure you've
Surprise.
encountered that one before. And
Oh,
it's interesting.
all the
So,
time.
but it's funny. I was at Bougainville Craig. This Swiss psychiatrist is now dirt napping, but had interesting things to say about the stock market and gambling, and essentially, uh, gambling the stock market. Like you win because God is on your side, and money is like a God essence. And he went wild with this stuff, and
Yes.
it's really
Prosperity
fascinating.
gospel.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's probably true. Very fascinating, and it's
Yeah.
always fun to take.
It seems in a uniquely American offshoot of the sort of magical thinking of manifestation or the secret. The idea that what you put out into the universe is what you're going to get back. This is a very, very, very old mystical idea. It's not a Christian idea, but the twisted Christian version of this is God will reward you for your good thoughts and good deeds and whatnot. And so, therefore, if you are walking around with the G7 airplane and the suits and the ties and the fancy dinners, well, clearly it's because God's awarding you these things because you're such a, faithful,
So
good servant, right?
they'll get Epstein and a bunch of terrible crimes against children, and all the 4-year-olds will get lots of ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah, it sucks. It's just another twisted way of rationalizing this hierarchical power structure behavior, right? And a great way to subjugate a bunch of people who are already marginalized and disenfranchised. And now we're going to enslave them basically in a system that they can't get out of. And some would argue that that's what the American system itself has become. And I would have a hard time countering that argument at this point.
Yeah, it was very
Yeah.
hard to leave. Thank you for that. It was very, very hard to leave. And the life outcomes are not good for people who
No.
grow up in that environment, aside from the lifelong effects. I do think it affects the brain for life, for sure. I mean, you look at all the accounts, and I mean, it's
There's no question.
no,
There's no question.
like,
There's a whole branch of psychology having to do with personality and identity that I connect with on this, because it messes with your senses. You've already mentioned, messes with your sense of identity and self in enormous ways, especially if you're raised in this stuff. It's bad enough if you're an adult convert and you slowly convert over into trying to become like the cult leader or become what your vision of the authority figure is. But for children, it's nothing but abuse, because you're telling the child, well, your personality, your identity, yourself is meaningless, worthless, and a sinner. And so we're just going to lay all these values and these ideas and dogma on you, and this is your own, again, binded choice, and this is your only path in life, and if you don't follow this, then you are doomed to hell 10,000 times over. But it's not even the supernatural afterlife that's the problem for the kid. It's the right here and now of beatings and abuse. It's horrible. It's just a recipe for absolute human disaster.
yeah, I think one thing that would be, helpful. I'm not sure it would be implemented, but would be to have a separate policing body that would be able to override the local police in these areas,
Mm.
and look into any sort of a complaint to child abuse,
Mm-hmm.
um, because the locals will just they'll if you look at the Brockville police, and you know and the local OPP, and the accounts are incredible. And I told them when I was being questioned, uh, and they just refused to believe that it was anything. They couldn't even conceive of it,
Yeah.
and they were
Right.
hostile to anything like that. These are guys, they're used to dealing with a stolen skidoo or something like this.
Right.
Like
Right.
it was so over their head.
And that's the number one way that these groups tend to get away with it, by the way. It's not that all the cops and all the authorities are evil or malicious or want to see kids be abused. They simply can't believe that some group or activity or parents would actually do that. So they hear these stories and they immediately, denial is the first barrier to cross, and often it can take years and years to wear that denial down, or as you mentioned, a senior authority has to come in and go, yeah, no, this is what's happening, and you guys just can't deal with that, and you're not doing your job as a result.
So I was talking to the second in charge, Joan Childs at Grenville Christian College, and she felt not that long ago, like maybe 2 weeks ago,
Hmm.
uh, again, multiple. When she was saying, agreed that, yeah, the police, surely the police somehow were protecting this school. Like, I just don't see how it could be otherwise. They would bring students back in an age where they were legally allowed to leave, but they bring them back.
Really? Really?
And just the way they worded it is not in the public interest, and yet there are all these child sexual assaults. Um, and it looked like the younger generation of police cleaning up for the older generation during the investigate. That's what it looked like.
Right.
But and then with me, there was no one around. They turned off the recording, and they grabbed me like this, you know, in my face. Well, of course they can get away with it. They're the police. And there's the great line of Juvenal the satirist, and who shall guard the guardians themselves.
Well, exactly, and that's been a bugbear for humanity since there've been three people around. So
But
it's a problem.
all of this was vindicated in the trial, and of course, all of this happened and more. And then we learned about not just a few cases of abuse. This like it was rife the whole way through. And then
Right.
the one of the headmasters was sexually assaulting children all the way through. The headmaster's son, and the CBC Fifth Estate reported on this. You know, he would grab the students' private parts in the showers, and it's yeah. When you try to go against this, you are really going against something pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So you gotta be ready. You gotta be ready for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
For sure. There's a real dark side to our nature. No denying it. It's there. I'm not trying to make excuses when I talk about denialism and stuff. I'm just talking about the layers of bullshit you have to get through with people. Even good-natured, well-intentioned people are the ones I'm referring to. When it comes to cops grabbing you and, turning the recorder off, that's not what I'm talking about. That's an asshole, right? That's a different level of behavior from some people simply can't believe the things that go on in this world. It's
no,
beyond their experience,
they get away with it.
Yeah, value,
They get away with
power,
it.
authority. It's human beings have a very, very, very hard time dealing with power.
Yeah.
Now, again, I just have a few more questions because I do want to kind of understand your narrative here. You grow up in this sequestered community of Jesus. At some point, your mother decides you need to
I
go
get
to this
sent to Grenville.
school.
She was teaching at Grenville Christian College.
Okay,
And then so it was basically my whole childhood under
got
the
it.
yoke of the community of Jesus. And I'd be
Got it.
coming back all the time on visits every summer and sometimes winter. And, at March break, I remember, and it was this repressive, uh, light session lifestyle that just became my life. And,
Right.
the suicide rate from Grenville is pretty, very, very high.
Mm.
And then you look at someone like Aaron Bushnell from the Community of Jesus, who self-immolated in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. last year. And, he grew up in the Community of Jesus. I knew his family well. You know,
Oh.
it's, and then you see his accounts. I have an essay on him in this. You see, you know, it's try to get past this. I would like to do something for the children that are still in there. No one did anything for me. Um, you know.
This group is still operating?
Oh yeah, they're still operating. They're not in Canada, but the group in the US is still operating. Oh yeah.
And this was
Yeah.
are they still in Cape Cod?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still about a couple hundred people?
It's difficult to say. It looks like there are fewer people,
Oh, okay. Okay.
but it's difficult to say how many people are there.
All
So,
right.
I mean, there's definitely maybe there's 200,
Yeah, it's very tiny.
175. It's,
Right. It's a tiny
I mean, it's
group.
like Renaissance medieval times. If you were caught counting people in an area, you'd be executed as a spy because it's how many soldiers you can draw from a population. So I don't
Jesus.
know.
All right.
I'm
Wow.
not sure, and I think this is something they would keep secret. Uh,
Sure. 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 I mean, this is one of, I'm going to say hundreds, perhaps thousands of such groups all over the US, off grid, off in these sequestered areas all over the place, from the desert regions, the mountains to, off the highway in Massachusetts. I mean, these groups, these religious communities are all over the place. I wish they were an isolated incidents of and rare, but they're not. I don't know if folks out there know that, but I just want the audience to understand this is all over the place. Now, as far as your experience with Grenville, how long were you there? And how'd you get out of this situation? Like, did you have to grow up and
Well,
just leave one night, or what
yeah,
happened?
a bit of drama. Don't have time to go into that, but I'll rewriting on that one day. But I left when I
Okay.
could. But
Okay.
yeah,
How old were you when you got out?
yeah, I was well, I mean, I had I had confrontations with them um in my late teenage years. One time the headmaster even they came up behind, they cornered me on a bridge. It's funny. I should have actually, I had a witness. I should have charged them. I didn't even realize I could have charged them. And he had his sort of minion types punching me. But I mean, these are people, they're not in very good shape. They're, like they're not particularly formidable people. But and I mean, he was this yeah,
Wow.
uh unimpressive individual in every way. But
Hmm.
any rate, yeah, that's I will write about that at one point.
Okay. All
But
right.
I did get
I'm
out,
glad.
and this book, I placed them in terms of the Christian nationalist situation. I do think in terms of emotional damage, I think they would be on the higher end
Hmm.
of cults.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, this sounds horrible.
um, you know, they I wonder if it was about financial gain or vanity, both. You
All the
know,
above. All the above.
yeah, I was, I wrote or everything,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's sad that something should be done for these children. Although, see, you could do something about it in Canada. In the U.S., I'm not sure much will be able to be done, and
No,
you're
it's
on your own, and that's
a little
sad.
fortunate that Grenville's in Canada, because there was a lawsuit, right?
So the lawsuit was successful, and they were, the judge's ruling was fantastic. Should read that.
Yeah. First, let's back up a second before we get to the ruling, because I want to understand the context of it. Who brought the lawsuit? How was that done? Just give me the broad strokes here.
Thank you. A number of students brought a class action lawsuit against Grenville Christian College, and it was successful. They were found to have breached their fiduciary duties. Um, and on all the accounts, they were found culpable. And was it the community of Jesus was named in terms of its values of submission. I'm going to try to find this. Okay, Justice Janet Leiper issued her decision on February 23rd, 2020, concluding that and then in quotes, the evidence of maltreatment and the varieties of abuse perpetrated on students' bodies and minds in the name, and then, in brackets of the COJ, Community of Jesus, values of submission and obedience was class wide and decades wide. And then one of the representative plaintiffs, Margaret Granger, one of the representative plaintiffs, put it to me: it's a precedent-setting case, and the first historical abuse case to win at trial in Canada.
Wow. Wow. See, and that's what I was referring to at the beginning of the show, right? Is there was legal action brought, where all too often in America we see legal action brought, dismissed, delayed, dismissed because of the First Amendment, because of people's nonsense, or most often because the cults have so much money that they can hire high-powered attorneys who can introduce so many legal roadblocks that it makes it impossible for the victims to get a day in court or get justice of any kind. This is Scientology 101 when it comes to legal tactics, for example. But Scientology is only really borrowing from every other cult's playbook when it comes to this. It's a thing they do in the same way that they enforce a snitch culture and a confession culture and compliance. It's just what they do with their money, is they protect themselves. But this is a case where the victims got some degree of recognition and justice as a result.
Yeah, I feel very badly for those who go through their lives. They've been uh, maltreated to significant levels, and then they don't have this because the amount of emotional pain that you go through with this denial, it's really, really sad. It's really, really sad. I feel very, very badly for those. What would you say? Well, privilege is actually something like this. You have a ruling in your favor. Even the other side is going to deny it. They'll deny it right to the grave. But
Sure.
um, you know, this is it was incredible to get this. And
How long did it take for that court case to go on? And were you
I,
part of it? Were you
I
were
think it
you part
was
of the class?
I think it was 14 years.
My
Yeah.
goodness. So
So
that's
yeah, I was
even there. 14 years.
yeah, and so I think a lot of people, it's like, I mean, yeah, and and in the end, there was no insurance for the years I was there. So
Mm-hmm.
the amounts given in Canada aren't large amounts like the US. Um, but it's really something to have a judge's ruling on this. Of course, it was upheld on appeal a couple years later. And,
Good.
um,
Good. So it's already gone through the appeals process and upheld. That's good.
yes, yes.
It took a similar amount of time for there to be successful cases against Scientology, by the way, even 20 years for one of the most significant lawsuits against that group to finally be paid off. And by the time, of course, that it wasn't about the money anymore because all that money went to the lawyers. It was just the victory of it. But if you can get it in front of the judge and you can get it to a point of closure, you can get some amazing statements from legal authorities. I mean, the Australia Supreme Court statement about the Church of Scientology is pretty blatant. Look, we have to defend or protect freedom of religion, even when it's an obvious con job and money making operation. People still have the right to believe what they're going to believe. We can't tell them not to, but at least they got to say it in legalese. This guy's a scam artist and he's scamming people, right? We know that. We get it. It's just, people have to have the right to be scammed because that's the opposite side of the coin. Otherwise, you're taking away everybody's right to believe whatever they want. It's
Now,
it's
isn't
hard.
Scientology banned in Germany? I should have looked that up again.
No, it's not banned in Germany. There are government regulations, and it's not a recognized religion there.
Oh, okay. So it's
Yeah,
it's
but it's
it's
not.
not a recognized, so they don't get tax benefits.
No,
So
German
they
government knows what Scientology is all about.
so what is their situation in Germany?
Well, it's a non-religious. If I remember this right, it's a religious entity that has not got state recognition of religiosity. So they don't have tax exemption, and there have been in the past. They've sort of toned it down over the years, but there were government officials who were very, very on to what Scientology was about and were actually issuing warnings to the public about it. But that's about as far as it went in Germany. They didn't, persecute Scientologists or, go after them for their beliefs. Thankfully, Russia has done that. By the way, they have put people in jail in Russia because they're Scientologists. And I've actually spoken out against that kind of behavior because it's not, it's the way to resolve this is not with totalitarian regulation. It's really education and public awareness, and at this point with Scientology worldwide, we've achieved that with so many of the documentaries and exposures that have happened about Scientology, and that's what's had more of a direct impact on people staying away from it and being able to easily Google it or easily search for it on the net and see immediately, all the survivor stories and abuse stories come up, and people can see right away that it's not what it purports to be.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
So they don't have a large presence in Germany, I'm guessing.
Oh, no, 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 no. Scientology does not have a large presence anywhere outside of the US, really. And it's a small, small, small group. I mean, it's not as small as, Community of Jesus, but it's, 30,000 members, something like that worldwide. They've never had millions of members. They lie about their numbers repeatedly, but they've never had those numbers. So they're growing and they're shrinking as an organization, as a body, as a religious movement. It's a shrinking activity. It's becoming more and more of what I call what has been described as a boutique religion for the uber wealthy is what it's sort of going toward. It's not there yet, but that's where it's going.
Wow,
So
that's a very funny way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it caters to a very elite crowd, and it creates elitism in a way that I've seen very, it's a very extreme group. Scientology is. It models itself as this very open, just a set of tools to fix your life, blah blah blah. It's all bullshit. It is one of the most hardcore and it's and I say this, it's not like there's a competition. Okay, trauma is trauma, and abusing kids is not okay in any context. Abusing adults in any context is not okay. So I'm not saying this to put some ladder of abuse there, but the sheer volume of psychological mechanisms in Scientology to really, the word is mentally enslave you, are legion. They far outnumber what most cults have, as far as just materials and number of things that it's doing to you, at a lot of levels. But they're all bad. So, like I said, it's not a competition. Now, is there anything else about this group or that legal victory that you want to comment on that we have not covered here today?
Oh, there's a lot that can be a lot that can be said, but yeah, yeah, they've almost gotten away with it. I hope that they will be um, monitored, at least for the children that are in there. It's probably you know, it's going to be a long road for that, but that would be a nice step. I think closing them down would be difficult in this
Yeah.
climate, but
Yep.
it'd be nice if there were a little bit of oversight.
It would.
Um,
It
and
would. It's yeah.
the fact that, yeah, the fact that they've been able to cover up this child sex abuse there, and it's really it's appalling. It's really,
It
really
is.
appalling.
It is. Well, that's why we do these talks. That's literally why we do this. Is so the audience out there, folks who are watching and listening right now, y'all can do something about this. I mean, there are demands can be made, letters can be written. I mean, the activity can be taken to demand that our government officials or regulatory bodies of some kind do something about this. The inertia of it is that if that doesn't happen, they won't. So,
Yeah,
you know,
it reminds me of, so the Boston Globe has written some fluff pieces on this Community of Jesus cult, but um, they won't take them on.
hmm,
And
hmm,
it appears the other newspaper has a very strong connection. It appears they have a strong connection to the group. So you know, it's going to be hard. And then if you try another newspaper, they'll be, why not try the Boston Globe? It's right in the area. Like, what? Why not? Well, it looks like there's a reason why. I mean, you know,
right, right.
I did speak with some of the Spotlight people. The Boston Globe has been very delicate in dealing with them. I mean, given the level, I mean, wouldn't expect them to comment on this, on my book. It's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating.
I hear
But
you. I do.
And you
I
think of
do.
these, I think of these children all the time. Think of
Yeah.
them all the time. And, it's
Yeah.
just, it was bad luck that they're in there. And a lot of them will be convinced, to be, gung ho part of it. But it's, you know,
It's
it's
part of the
sad.
human
Very
condition, my
sad.
friend.
Very,
That's right.
very sad. It's very, very sad.
Yeah, it is. It sucks. But I want to thank you for doing what you're doing to expose it, to talk about it.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And thank you for having me.
you bet. It's been a very good talk, and I'm glad we got a chance to do this. Folks out there, we're going to wrap up right now. I want to give people, Ewan, the chance to be able to reach out to you if they want to. How do people find you?
Oh, just ewanwhyte.com. I was going to show the book, the cover of the book.
Oh, what's the book?
Mothers of Invention, Essays in the Community of Jesus in Grenville Christian College.
Excellent. All right. So you can find details about that book and Ewan and his other work, because this is not the only book he's written, on that website. You can see it right there under his name. So
you can get it at Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. You can get it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, good. Well, if you're interested in checking that out or reaching out to him, you can do so that way. We're going to wrap up right now. Folks out there, thank you very much for being part of this show and listening to us talk about this. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.